In the dense heart of a vast and ancient forest lived many creatures, each with its unique beauty and strength. Among them were two distinct animals, a peacock named Roger, known far and wide for his stunning plumage, and a humble tortoise named Kavi, whose slow pace and quiet demeanor made him easily overlooked by the more vibrant animals of the forest. Chapter 1. The pride of Roger. Roger the peacock had always been the center of attention. With his resplendent feathers in hues of emerald green, royal blue, and shimmering gold, he would fan out his tail into a magnificent display that left everyone in awe. Wherever Roger went, the animals stopped to admire him, whispering about how he was the most beautiful creature they had ever seen. He basked in their admiration, strutting through the forest with his head held high. Every morning, he would make his way to the riverbank, where he would gaze at his reflection in the still water, marveling at his beauty. Roger's heart brimmed with pride, and he began to believe that his beauty alone made him the greatest of all the forest creatures. One day, as he admired his reflection, Roger noticed Kavi the tortoise walking slowly along the riverbank, heading toward the shade of an old tree. The tortoise's shell was dark and cracked from age, and his gait was slow and deliberate. Roger chuckled to himself, thinking about how dull Kavi seemed in comparison. "Why, Kavi," Roger called out in a mocking tone, "with that drab shell of yours and your slow pace, it must be hard to live in a world where creatures like me exist. How do you even manage to get anywhere?" Kavi paused and looked up at Roger, his eyes calm and wise. "I get where I need to go, Roger." "Speed isn't everything," Roger laughed. "Perhaps. But beauty, my friend, is what makes the world notice you. What's the point of life if no one stops to admire you?" Kavi simply smiled and continued on his way. He was used to such remarks, and they never bothered him. He knew that life was more than appearances, though he doubted Roger could understand that. Roger strutted away, convinced that he had won the conversation, and resumed admiring his reflection. Chapter 2. The challenges. The days passed. Roger's vanity grew. He began to believe that because of his beauty, he was superior to all the other creatures in the forest. He even stopped speaking to animals he deemed less worthy of his presence, spending most of his time alone by the riverbank, perfecting the way he fanned his feathers. One day, a great celebration was announced in the forest. The wise elephant elder, Gayendra, had declared a grand feast to celebrate the forest's diversity and the contributions of all its creatures. Every animal was invited, and there would be games, music, and dancing. Excitement spread through the forest like wildfire. Roger, hearing about the celebration, was thrilled. He imagined the grand entrance he would make and how all the animals would gasp in admiration at his feathers. He began to prepare, preening himself constantly to ensure he would look perfect for the event. On the day of the feast, the forest was alive with activity. Animals from all corners gathered in a great clearing. Gayendra stood at the center, his deep voice booming as he welcomed everyone. Roger arrived fashionably late, wanting to make sure that all eyes would be on him when he made his entrance. As he strutted into the clearing, his feathers spread wide. The animals did indeed turn to look. Murmurs of admiration rippled through the crowd, and Roger soaked it all in. Gayendra smiled at Roger, but did not single him out. Instead, the elephant elder turned to address the entire crowd. "Today, we celebrate not just our strengths, but also our differences. Each of us has something unique to offer, and today, we will honor that with a series of challenges. The first challenge is endurance." A murmur went through the crowd as the animals wondered what kind of endurance challenge it would be. Gayendra continued, "In this challenge, we will walk from the clearing to the top of Mount Ashva, the highest point in the forest. It is a difficult journey, and only the strongest and most determined will reach the summit. Roger smirked. This will be easy, he thought to himself. I may not be the fastest, but I am determined, and my beauty will surely inspire me to the top. The animals lined up at the starting point, and Gyendra gave the signal to begin. Roger started off confidently, his feathers trailing behind him as he strutted along the path. He was not in a hurry, convinced that his endurance would see him through. However, the journey quickly became more difficult than Roger had anticipated. The path grew steeper, and the terrain rougher. Rocks and roots littered the ground, making it hard to walk without stumbling. Roger's long feathers, once his pride and joy, now became a burden. They dragged on the ground, getting caught on thorns and branches. As he struggled to free himself from a particularly stubborn thorn bush, he noticed Kavi the tortoise slowly making his way up the path. Roger's pride flared. How can Kavi, with his slow pace and heavy shell, be ahead of me? He thought angrily. Determined not to be outdone, Roger yanked his feathers free and quickened his pace, though it only caused him more trouble, as his feathers continued to snag on the underbrush. Meanwhile, Kavi continued his slow, steady pace, never rushing, but never stopping either. He moved methodically, navigating the obstacles with ease, his shell providing protection from the thorns and rocks that Roger struggled with. As the day wore on, many of the animals began to tire. Some turned back, deciding that the summit was too far, while others rested by the side of the path, exhausted. Roger, too, felt his strength waning. His once perfect feathers were now ragged and torn, and his legs ached from the steep climb. But he refused to give up, driven by the fear of being outshone by the tortoise. Finally, after what felt like hours of struggle, Roger reached the summit. He collapsed on the ground, gasping for breath. He looked around and was stunned to see Kavi already there, sitting calmly near the edge of the cliff, gazing out at the forest below. Roger couldn't believe it. How? How did you get here before me? He panted, his pride wounded. Kavi turned to Roger and smiled kindly. I didn't rush, he said simply. I knew it would be a long journey, so I took it one step at a time, slow and steady. As they say, Roger stared at Kavi, realizing that while he had been consumed by his desire to prove himself, Kavi had focused on the journey itself, taking each step with patience and perseverance. Chapter 3. The lesson of true beauty. Feast continued into the evening, and while many animals were enjoying the festivities, Roger sat alone, lost in thought. His feathers were no longer the perfect symbol of beauty he had always believed them to be. They were torn, dirty, and no longer drew the admiration of the crowd. For the first time in his life, Roger felt uncertain about himself. Kavi approached him quietly and sat beside him. You seem troubled, Roger, he said gently. Roger sighed. I've always thought that my beauty was what made me special. But today I realized that beauty can't carry you through everything. I struggled so much during the climb, and in the end, it didn't matter how beautiful my feathers were. You, with your old shell and slow pace, reached the summit before me. How did you do it? Kavi smiled and looked up at the stars. Beauty is not just about how we look on the outside, Roger. True beauty comes from within. It's in the way we carry ourselves, how we treat others, and how we face challenges. I may not have feathers like yours, but I've learned that patience, endurance, and humility are what truly matter in the long run. Roger listened intently, for the first time, seeing the wisdom in Kavi's words. I've been so focused on how others see me that I've never thought about what's inside, Roger admitted. Kavi nodded. It's easy to get caught up in appearances. But life is about more than just being admired. It's about the journey, the lessons we learn, and the connections we make along the way. Your feathers may be beautiful, Roger, but they're not what define you, As the night went on, Roger and Kavi continued to talk, and Roger began to see the world in a new light. He realized that Kavi's quiet strength and wisdom were far more admirable than his own flashy appearance. For the first time in his life, Roger felt a deep sense of humility. Chapter 4: A New Beginning. The next day, Roger woke up feeling lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted from his heart. He no longer felt the need to constantly seek admiration or prove himself to others. Instead, he was determined to become more like Kavi, patient, humble, and wise.